my dream would be to write for video games one day. But I love huge, overarching stories, massive, in-depth world building, intense lore. I love taking it apart. I love putting it back together. It's one of my favorite things ever. I am a huge fan, in particular, of what is known as speculative fiction. Speculative fiction is pretty much anything that is not grounded in reality. So that could be an entirely fictional world, like Tolkien's Middle-earth. That could be a somewhat fantastical world. Think the Vampire Diaries, where it's set in Earth, and yet there are these supernatural entities that most people don't know about, and it's sort of a secret society. So speculative fiction can cover anything from fantasy, sci-fi, horror, dystopia. It is my favorite. It is my favorite playground. And naturally, as someone whose favorite sci-fi universe was Mass Effect for many, 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 many years, I found my way to Love and Deepspace. Which is funny because I'm not usually a romance otome kind of person, but Love and Deepspace has my favorite sci-fi universe since Mass Effect, and I love dissecting the lore. I love picking it apart. I'm obsessed with it. So, what does that mean for me, for you? Why are you here? Why are you watching this video? Well, I love to make lots of theories. I also love to analyze the imagery that we are given, particularly in myths, not only in myths, but myths tend to be very symbolism heavy. And I love picking it apart. And I love talking about it and sharing it with people. None of my friends play this game, like my real life friends. I've cultivated a really cool online community of people who do. I love all of you, every single one of you. And so I thought I can yap a little bit about it here, maybe, if anybody wants to listen. I'm going to start by talking about... This is where I'll have to edit the video. Before we got Sylus's third myth, I was working on a video essay about his myth beyond Cloudfall, otherwise known as his dragon myth. That remains my favorite myth to date. I'm obsessed with it. I will always be obsessed with it. Then we got Sylus's third myth before I could get that out. So now this is going to become a little bit of a hybrid of discussing his second and third myths. So that would be Beyond Cloudfall and Where Silver Wings Rest. Sylus is so I'm a harem girl. Let me get that on the books. I'm a harem girly. I play everybody because I'm obsessed with their writing. I'm obsessed with everybody's character development, their plots, their backstory, their lore. But I would be lying to you if I said I didn't have a hierarchy. And Sylus is indeed the love of my life. And so I have analyzed his lore the most in depth for now. I would really like to do a deep dive into everybody and other aspects of the game too. That's beside the point. So Sylus is who I understand best for now in terms of an imagery symbolism perspective. So I want to get into it a little bit. I want to talk about why do I love his dragon myth so much. I want to talk about, of course, his third myth, how it relates to the dragon myth, and also predictions I have for his next myth based on his dragon myth. I also want to bring up, this just happened because we just got the live stream yesterday. I'm filming this on December 27th. So I also want to touch on something I saw in the live stream that we're going to get with the second anniversary update 5.0. And that would be the multi-banner that we're getting, the AU futuristic sci-fi banner that we're getting. Sylus's card in particular has a very interesting name that is very connected to some of the lore I was researching when I was doing all my research for this. So we're going to get into it. We're going to start from there. I love Sylus's second myth, his dragon myth, for a plethora of reasons. I'm going to take you through a couple of them. First, I'm going to just sort of tell you, in terms of me as a human being, what I loved symbolically about his third myth. And this is very much up to interpretation. This is not like rooted in any kind of other mythology. This is just sort of me as a human being and like my lived experience and like how it came across to me. And that's why I resonated so much with it and why I resonated so much with him as a character. My favorite part of the dragon myth, which is going to sound crazy, but go with me. When I played it for the first time, I was most moved. I mean, I was moved by all of it, particularly his self-sacrifice in the end, of course. But the most striking image that stayed with me was the last line, 2 lines maybe, where MC turns into a dragon herself. Now, to kind of illustrate why that stuck with me so much, a lot of people kind of hold on to this idea that Sylus and MC are the same and they're like 2 halves of a whole, and it's kind of manifesting this like ultimate connection between them, and I don't disagree with any of that. I would add that what made that so compelling to me is his dragon mythos seemed to really scream at me a kind of allegory for trauma and how trauma changes us and shapes us, not just ourselves, but to society. And the reason that I say that is after Sylus has died at the end of his dragon myth. I should really put a spoiler warning at the beginning of this video. So sorry. After Sylus has died at the end of his dragon myth, before we see MC's full transformation, we are given a flashback into Sylus's past. And what we see is he begins to grow horns and a tail. He's terrified. He doesn't understand why, because up until this point, he's been humanoid. He's never had any of these monster-like features. So he begins to self-mutilate to try and get rid of them. They always grow back. So we're already dealing with a young boy who's enduring a lot of pain and suffering on his own, confused, not understanding. And then humans come in. Cue the humans. It's always the humans. The humans storm the castle, as it were, and they eradicate all of Sylus's kin. All of them. He bears witness to all of this. He watches as his family and his kin are systematically unalived. And he himself, looking humanoid, however, the humans take him and pseudo-adopt him. Well, that goes great until his horns and his tail start to grow again. The humans turn on him immediately and try to unalive him. He wakes up at the bottom of a ravine, gutted, impaled, somehow alive. He doesn't even know how. He's surrounded by the gore of the humans that he can only assume he offed in self-defense. He blacks out pretty much. He doesn't even remember, because how effing traumatic for a child to endure this. But the part I want to focus on is, as he, in response to enduring this level of trauma, Sylus then has wings, massive wings, erupt from his back with such force that they completely destroy boulders that are around him. And there's a particular line where, at least in the English localization, there's a particular line that says, what was Sylus's like inner demon had now become his strength. So this was sort of the origin story of Sylus's transformation into a kind of human dragon hybrid. What triggered his initial full transformation where he gets the wings was this really horrific a series of events where he witnessed and endured so much pain and suffering that I can't, as a child, okay? And then we have MC. All right, we have MC. She is an orphan. She's taken in by this religious order. She's raised, told that she's going to be a weapon against dragons, told that she is kind of a holy warrior and that she's so important. And then she's found to be worshiping, I say worshiping. It's having a toy, because she, again, is a child. She has a lamp with a dragon on it. But dragon iconography is like extremely, like explicitly outlawed. So for that one act of a transgression, which isn't even a transgression, but I'm trying to sum up here. In the eyes of her holy order is what is a transgression. She is labeled a sorceress. She is denounced, and she is thrown into the abyss, presumably to her death. Now, as we know, she survives. Sylus is imprisoned at the bottom of this abyss. She frees him, makes a deal with him that he protects her, yada, yada. Okay, great. But this is where we start to see some of MC's dragon-like nature appear. Sylus makes a few comparisons throughout the myth that she reminds him of a young dragon who's just grown her horns. And there's a moment from his point of view, which is something I love, by the way, that Sylus's writers do a lot, is writing from his POV. I wish we got it more with the other boys. I just played Zane's rerun card Medical Rescue, and we got a little bit of POV from him. I loved that. I want more. I want all of it for all the boys. Anyway, tangent aside. As you can tell, I'm very ADHD. Tangent aside. There's a moment when Sylus is carrying MC back from the tavern where they watched that play together, where Sylus was showing MC what happens to a dragon's lover. It's nothing good, as I'm sure you all know. She's falling asleep. He's carrying her. He starts telling her a story to kind of help her fall asleep. A kind of lullaby, if you will. But he's telling the story of, it's kind of a generalization of dragons, but it's also completely about himself and MC. He says the love of his life appeared. We know that that's MC, but he has a little bit of internal dialogue where he says, you know, it was the moment that he saw her scratched face when she kept trying to climb out of his lair. And maybe it was, you know, like, why was he so smitten? Why was he so fascinated by her? Why was he so taken with her? And he says maybe it was because she reminded him of herself, her of himself, excuse me. Maybe she reminded her of himself when he was a young dragon. Maybe because she herself was a little monster. So we have these little sprinkling moments of MC having a little bit of a dragonish nature. When she first falls into the abyss with Sylus, he kind of says, your soul is boring. It's lackluster. You don't want anything. You don't have any great desires. And as she goes through the story, her greed grows, particularly a hunger for vengeance, which I could do a whole video about MC's vengefulness because I love it. And I think it's maybe my favorite aspect of her character, but that's a video for another day. Anyway, my point being, we start seeing MC have little tiny sprinklings of maybe being a little dragonish. When they exchange half of each other's souls with one another, she starts to act more like a dragon. When she's imprisoned by the League of Justicia, she kind of blacks out and comes to with her teeth sunk into a guard's neck. She starts to not be able to tell what's her reality and what Sylus is. And then eventually, we get to the end of the myth, which will never not be devastating, where Sylus sacrifices himself to save her and to end this cycle of them wanting to destroy one another. And the League of Justicia has been completely eradicated. Sylus, in his dragon frenzy, has pretty much gone around destroying all of the cities when he was looking for MC when she was imprisoned. So it's basically the end of the world. This is basically post-apocalyptic. She's basically the only one left. All the dragons are gone. All the humans are gone. Sylus is gone. And she witnessed Sylus die horrifically, brutally, and held him as he breathed his last. She is so traumatized by this that she feels vengeful. She feels as though this was a betrayal from Sylus, and she curses his soul. Now, we're going to come back to the cursing his soul for lore later, but in terms of the allegory of trauma, I'm going to leave it there for a second. Because after she's endured all of this, and she stands, and she's ready to leave his corpse where it lay, she has her final transformation. A tail and horns sprout from her flesh. And the final line of the myth, I literally have goosebumps talking about this right now. The final line of the myth is, "It is only after my dragon is gone that I finally become one with him." Okay, first of all, the most stunning imagery and line that I could conceive of, and I'm jealous, and I want the writers to hire me. Would you guys hire me? Or can I just come sit in the writing room while you're working? But anyway, so after MC has endured her own trauma is when she fully transforms. Now, I think there's something to be said for the effect trauma has on our nervous system and how it does change us foundationally. I also think there's something to be said for cycles of trauma. And part of why I also love this myth so much is the way Sylus takes agency in the end to end the cycle. Yes, he makes a self-sacrifice. Yes, he loses his life. But he is completely determined to end that cycle of abuse. He, as a dragon, is doomed to succumb to his dragon frenzy and kill his beloved. MC is the dragon's destined arch nemesis. She is the only one capable of unaliving him. And so instead of fulfilling this prophecy of mutual destruction, Sylus is able, in his last moments of coherence, to take MC's hand, manifest the soul blade, and drive it into his own chest. So instead of mutual destruction, it's only one self-assured destruction.
The other thing I wanted to mention is about Sylus's willingness to break the cycle, and especially why that is so significant. When we are changed by trauma, by abuse, when this rewires our nervous system, it's very easy for us to settle back into survival tactics, because that's what we know. That's how we survived when we endured trauma, and our lizard brain kicks in, and that's what keeps us alive. And Sylus's mantra in the main story, and particularly in his World Underneath entry with Luke and Kieran, he says this in his dragon myth, but he also tells this to the boys, to Luke and Kieran. He says that surviving is the strongest thing that you can do. Dying is easy. Survival is the greatest measure of strength. In his dragon myth specifically, he tells MC that if you want someone to suffer, you'll make sure they survive and they stay alive. Death, that's a release, that's a mercy. Surviving, if you want someone to really suffer, is what you should want for them. Which is why, in her vengeful state, MC curses his soul to never fade, because she feels vengeful about his quote-unquote betrayal, his leaving her, even though it was in the service of protecting her and of ending this cycle of abuse. All of this is to say that Sylus goes against his deepest, most innate and inherent life skill, which is to survive at all costs, and sacrifices his life for that of his beloved. And if that is not a testament to breaking a cycle, one cycles of trauma responses, generations of abuse within families, within systems, then I don't know what is. And that is another reason I believe that the dragon myth demonstrates his strength of character.
I think there's a lot to be said as somebody who comes from a family with two sides of really horrible, abusive people. There's something really powerful about that image. But I also think there's something a little bit more interesting within the lore as well. And that would be how people react to dragons in this world. Dragons are also called fiends. We're going to get to that because it's significant in terms of lore stuff. But dragons are also called fiends. And Sylus tells MC that people really kind of don't see fiends like their true form. They kind of infuse meaning onto the form that they see of a fiend. So, they're walking around this market. He's not in any kind of disguise. And MC's like, you're not really worried, bro, that anybody's going to pull the alarm or be nervous? And he's like, no, because people are going to see what they want to see when they look at me. It's not the real me. They're going to see ugliness. They're going to see fear. Which tell me, not only do they see ugliness, they see fear, but these humans have ostracized and committed genocide against this species of dragon. They fear them greatly. There's an entire prophecy about how dragons bring about doomsday. And we might have this idea of, oh, well, dragons are just beasts, and look how violent Sylus is, and do. But there's another moment in this myth that I like to bring up to kind of counteract that point, and that would be in the very beginning. I believe it's chapter 2, I believe. MC takes Sylus to the White City, a temple in the White City, and he sees the art of the adjudicator slaying the dragon, and there's text beneath it, and he starts to read it, and MC says, you can read that? And he says, you can't? And she said, no, it's an ancient language. He was trapped in the abyss for 1,677 years, if I recall correctly. I probably do, because I've watched this myth a disgusting amount of times. And MC says, so what does it say? And he reads what it says. But what I want to bring everyone's attention to is the fact that he is reading an ancient language. Not only is it ancient and lost to time, okay, but also just he's literate. So dragons are literate. He had to learn literacy somewhere. He certainly wasn't hanging out with humans. I mean, maybe they could have taught him literacy, but we don't get the vibe that he was with them very long before they figured out he was actually a dragon. So dragons had culture. Dragons had society. They had reading and writing. So this makes me reflect a little on what is really the nature of dragons. Are they really as beastly and monstrous as people say? Or in true human fashion, were we afraid of what we didn't understand? Now, all of this is to loop back to look me in my face and tell me that people don't do the same to those who have endured trauma or who are mentally ill. I am not saying that those who are traumatized and or mentally ill are worthy of derision or scorn. Quite the opposite. They are just as human as anyone else. But society treats them as though they're not. And as we see through this myth, Sylus and MC are more than human. They're both so capable of deep emotion, of vulnerability, of connection, of making meaning out of life. And if that's not what the human experience is, I don't know what it is, to be honest with you. And yet, both of them have been completely othered and shunned by society. So I think that there is a very significant case to be made that the dragon myth as it stands is an astute allegory for trauma and mental health. That all being said, we can also get into some of the symbolism and lore that is rooted in real cultural myth in our world as we know it. So I aptly predicted, let me say roughly predicted, what the third myth was going to be about. And I can tell you how I did that. And that was analyzing some of the imagery that was offered in Sylus' dragon myth. The two most significant, because I was theorizing for months that Sylus was the king of the underworld. That was my running theory for a very long time.
Hi, Editing Billabong here. I had a couple notes that I didn't actually get to hit in this original recording, so I want to hit them now. One of the things I wanted to mention from the main story about kind of my prediction of Sylus being king of the underworld is the fact that Sylus is the leader of Anakinus, which is the head of the N109 zone and also sort of the main criminal syndicate, not just on Earth, but intergalactically. So what does that make Sylus in the main story in the modern day? Quite literally, the king of the criminal underworld. So it was kind of there in our faces from the beginning all along.
I think there were two aspects in particular of his dragon myth that led me to that. Now, there's also some hints throughout the main story, throughout his other memories, that are peppered everywhere because everything Infold does is intentional. But to touch on the two really significant kind of themes and images in his dragon myth that really made that pop for me were the focus on Judeo-Christian imagery in terms of kind of sin and greed and falling from grace, rebelling against fate. And from Greek mythology, there was a lot of imagery of Hades and Persephone in his dragon myth. That was, for me, the biggest alarm bell. I'm very familiar with Greek mythology. That is one thing I know extremely well. Now, in doing research for this video, the first version of the video, and then this subsequent video, anyway, I also really started to come to understand some more of the Chinese influences and East Asian influences in Sylus' lore and mythology. The Hades and Persephone imagery that we see in the dragon myth. There are, to me it felt like it was everywhere, but that's just because I'm such a Greek mythology nerd. So if you don't know the story of Hades and Persephone, I'm going to give you a very quick bullet-pointed list for you. Essentially, Hades, ruler of the underworld, god of the underworld. Persephone, daughter of Demeter, who Demeter was the goddess of spring and the harvest and life. Hades was very in love with Persephone, wanted to marry Persephone. Persephone didn't even really know Hades very well, just was sort of going about her life. Oh, I feel like this is a very relatable tale for most women. Basically, Hades goes to Zeus. Zeus is Persephone's father with Demeter, but goes to Zeus, not with Demeter, and says, I want to marry your daughter. Zeus says, sure, go ahead. So essentially what Hades does is comes out of the ground with his chariot and abducts Persephone and takes her back to the underworld. Demeter, her mother, is devastated and goes into a profound mourning period. It is this mourning period in which the seasons change from a verdant, vibrant spring and summer to a cold, transitional, kind of deathly fall and winter. Persephone is stuck in the underworld with Hades. Demeter is so devastated that the land remains barren. Zeus goes to Hades and says, this can't stay this way. You got to give Persephone back. We have to have the world in balance. Hades says, yeah, okay, sure. But instead comes up with a plan to eternally bind Persephone to the underworld, which is to have her ingest the seeds of a pomegranate. Now, it's hotly debated in academic circles what the seed of a pomegranate could symbolize. Is it literal? Could the seed be symbolic for, apologies for being graphic, the seed of a man? In terms of if, a man, back in the times that we're talking about, the Greek myth was relevant. If a man took a woman's virginity, then she was eternally, she had been eternally soiled by him. He owned her. It wasn't like she could then go and marry another man. So, again, it's debated what the pomegranate really symbolizes, but for the myth, the images of a pomegranate, the seeds of a pomegranate. So Hades tricks her into ingesting these seeds of a pomegranate, and she becomes eternally bound to the underworld. And so essentially what this leads to, they all make a deal, Zeus, Demeter, Hades, Persephone. They all come to an agreement that for 6 months of the year, Persephone will be above ground with her mother, Demeter. There will be spring, there will be summer, there will be life. And then for 6 months of the year, she will return to the underworld with her husband, Hades. Demeter will mourn, she will grieve, then we will have fall and winter. Now, in terms of where I see this for Sylus's dragon myth, I see this several places. When MC takes Sylus to the White City and asks him to exact her revenge, and then she's trying to escape, he quite literally grabs her and ferries her to his lair. It's not a one-to-one, but it did remind me of Hades abducting Persephone. Number 2, there is an entire scene in the myth, I believe it's chapter 5, with a pomegranate between Sylus and MC. They are looking over some maps. They're trying to decide where they're going to raid next, because these two are just silly little criminals who just like to go and raid humans, which, after what humans did to both of them, I don't blame either of them. But they're looking over these maps, and MC grabs a pomegranate off the table. Now, what's really interesting about the choreography of this scene is that before she's able to take a bite, Sylus snatches it out of her hand and takes his own bite, which is very interesting to me, because the pomegranate itself is the thing that's going to tie Persephone to the underworld forever, robs her of her agency. Now, for any of my Sylus girlies out there, or just people who are interested in his lore, I'm sure that you probably know that aside from the main story, long-awaited revelry, that entrance, Sylus is pretty much the consent king and the king of championing MC's agency and autonomy. There is nothing more important to him than that. To the point where in Razor's, it's either Razor's Grip or Razor's Dance, they're a pair, and I never remember which one is which, but in either Razor's Grip or Razor's Dance, they make a deal, because that's also his thing. He loves making deals. They make a deal that if MC... I can't even remember exactly what the deal is about. But if MC does something and she achieves that goal, then he will disappear from her life forever, if that's what she wants. She achieves the goal, he says, deuces. He literally disappears from her life. And she is the one who has to seek him out and say, no, I don't want this, and you're not allowed to leave me. But he was willing to acquiesce to her wishes, even though that's not what he wanted, because he respects her desires and her agency so much. All of that I bring that up is what I think is interesting about this subversion of the pomegranate, is that before MC is able to unknowingly lose her agency, tie herself to him forever, this is all symbolism, of course, Sylus snatches it and doesn't let her. And then it's only when MC intentionally takes it back and says, I want a bite, that she gets to have a bite of this pomegranate. But the point being that this is all in MC's power by her own hand through her own autonomy, which is something that Sylus prioritizes in every timeline, in every universe. So it's very much in keeping with his character, while also paralleling the Hades and Persephone imagery. Now, there's another moment, because of course there is. So there's another moment towards the end of the card in the closing Kindled, where they go to the flower field. And yes, for everybody who's crying, saying they didn't really go there. Well, I don't agree. I do agree to a point. I think people always say, oh, it was just a dream. I don't think it was just a dream in terms of like I went to sleep, I had a dream, I woke up, it never happened. I think it's closer to like telepathic communication or like astral projection. And the reason that I say that is once they exchange one half of each other's souls with one another, they do literally begin to start sharing visions. And so I don't think this was a dream that only MC had. I think it was very much one that they both had, and I think it was shaped by both of their wills and their wishes. I do think they were making active choices in this vision, just like later on when Sylus, quote unquote, visits MC while she's imprisoned. They have a real conversation acknowledging the meta nature of like how they're able to talk at that point. And she's like, well, you couldn't sleep either. And, well, someone's soul was being noisy again. Like, they're very much aware of what's going on. It's kind of like lucid dreaming, but I feel like even a step above that because it's shared between them, maybe. Anyway, in the flower field during their shared vision, they have an exchange where Sylus tells MC that this beautiful field of flowers, this field of Datura, blooms, but only for one person. And what was interesting to me about that, obviously he means MC. What was interesting to me about that is that it felt as though it mirrored the ways in which life, plants, nature, harvests would not flourish on Earth until Persephone came above ground from the underworld and returned to her mother. Again, the interesting part being, Hades did not want that to happen. He wanted Persephone with him always. They had to come to a compromise, this deal where she could return to her mother. Again, Sylus subverting the expectations while still sort of honoring the mythology. He recognizes her agency. He accommodates her returning above ground because he recognizes her as her own person. This is what makes Sylus my favorite. Anyway, let me stop. Let me get off my high horse. Now, there's also some Judeo-Christian imagery. Honestly, there's more of that in his third myth, which we're also going to start to get into. But before we leave the dragon myth, let me also just bring up a couple more points. One thing I want to note about dragons that's very interesting, and I did not know this until I took a workshop on Dracula. So the actual text of Dracula, but then sort of all of the literature and cultural movements that spawned from Dracula. So, pop culture's obsession with vampires and how their mythos has changed over time. All of that. So, in this workshop, I read a novel called The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. I highly recommend it. It's historical fiction if anybody likes that genre. And what is brought up in this novel is, first of all, going back to Old Romanian, Dracul meant dragon and devil. Dracula meant son of the dragon or son of the devil. Now, if I recall correctly, I don't have any text in front of me right now, but if I recall correctly, Vlad the Impaler, who Dracula was based on, was part of an order called the Order of the Dragon, which used the word Dracul. Now in Romanian, it means devil. But originally, it had ties to dragons. And the reason that I bring this up is because not only is the etymology of that singular Old Romanian word branched into two seemingly distinct concepts, symbols, But a lot of the mythology also parallels. There is a lot of dragon and demon mythology that evolved together and also parallel to each other. So what I mean by that is before we as a society were connected globally, before ideas could spread over the internet, before they could spread via writing, before anybody had discovered other continents by creating ships and sailing the ocean, these societies and cultures were independently developing very similar mythologies about demonic entities and dragons. And they were always very interrelated. So, it felt very natural for our number one fiend to go from his draconic existence in his second myth to his demonic existence in his third myth. Now, something very interesting. I know when the trailer first dropped for his third myth, people kind of freaked out. Because they were like, oh, great, he's a vampire. But then other people were like, oh, so predictable, he's a vampire. We've been saying that forever. And what's interesting to me is people sort of reacted like, oh, he's just a vampire. Like, oh, like, Zane's god of annihilation, and Raph is god of Lemuria, and like... But what's very interesting is if you look back into some very old Judeo-Christian mythos, like even predating, if you ever read any kind of texts on demonology, or even just wiki demonology, the first vampires were thought to be revived from fallen angels through blood and ashes. And the three names that you can find, or at least that I could find, were Baal, Belial, and Morlock, who, if you play kind of any sort of demon-based video game, such as like Diablo is the first one that comes to my mind. I love the Diablo series. Are demons, like arch-demons in hell. So for Sylus to be vampiric in his third myth was not at all surprising, and it did not at all feel mutually exclusive to me that he was also an archfiend. Now, the idea of a fiend. This is something very interesting I found when digging into Chinese mythos. In Chinese mythology, there are said to be 4 fiends who are they kind of embody elements of evil, but they themselves are not particularly evil. They're kind of like natural forces, if you will. You should definitely read about them. And there's a lot. One of my friends was telling me that a lot of Final Fantasy mythos talks uses the fiend mythology from Chinese lore. But one in particular caught my attention when I was reading about Sylus because it was said to kind of embody like greed and desire, and also said to be... It has a very interesting form. It's like a bunch of different animals put together, but it's said to be a son of a dragon. And its name that I absolutely will butcher if I try to pronounce the Chinese, I'm so sorry, but translates roughly to primordial chaos. Why do I bring that up? Well, we're going to jump ahead from the third myth for a second, because in the live stream we saw yesterday for the 2-year anniversary multi-banner event thing happening, Sylus's card is called, and I quote, Primordial Chaos, which I may have crashed out on stream over that a little bit. I was very excited. But so I beg anyone to kind of, I will reiterate, I am not super familiar with East Asian mythology. And so I've learned a lot already just trying to research about Love and Deepspace and Sylus, but there is so much. I feel like I've barely excavated the surface. I am not an expert by any means. I defer to anyone who is an expert. This is me trying to conduct my own research, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm the best at that, because I'm not. Homegirl has ADHD, she tries, but she gets distracted every 20 seconds. So, that is also very interesting about his nature as a fiend. Now, going back to his third myth. The Judeo-Christian imagery is so fascinating to me. Now, I mentioned that the first vampires were said to be fallen angels revived from blood and ashes. Now, I don't know how closely anybody may have paid attention to the text that MC grabs to summon Sylus, but there's a preview of it before she does the summoning ritual, that very first kindled where he appears, the blood ritual. And again, I don't have this thing in front of me right now. You would think that with so much lore and stuff, I would like have notes in front of me. I have nothing because ADHD brain. But there was a line that stuck out to me because I read it over and over. And when it's talking about the legend of Sylus the Archfiend, it specifically says, when Sylus descends, first of all, descending from where? But that's insinuating that he's coming down from somewhere, okay? When Sylus descends, he descends into 7 shadows. Now, I also have a whole theory about the number 7 in this game, and I think that that probably warrants another video. But what I want to focus on is the descending part. Where is he descending from? Because the underworld is down. That's as far down as you can go, theoretically. Go with me. So he started higher? He started higher up? From where? Did he fall? Now, we also know that Sylus rebels against fate at each and every opportunity. That is his favorite thing to do, and we love that for him. He does it at the end of the dragon myth. He does it at the end of this myth, where he encourages MC to do, he helps support MC to be able to do it at the end of the 3rd myth. But what was Lucifer, if not rebelling against the divine order of heaven, when he refused to bow to humans in the image of God? Now, I'm not trying to like push Satanism here, but I do want to draw attention to the fact that I don't think we can rule out the fact that Sylus is some sort of a fallen divine entity. That being said, I am a little bit more suspicious for a different, and these might not be mutually exclusive. Maybe it'll be both. Who knows? But I have a suspicion of a path Infold might take with him for his 4th myth, whenever that'll be, because I think we're not getting any 4th myths until the 2027. I think that's the word on the street. I don't know if it's real. Although y'all tend to be really right with what you say, so I'm gonna defer to you in the ether. But Sylus, in his 3rd myth, tells a story. At the auction, when MC is trying to get the book of poetry from Saren, and she's using her magic, Sylus fucks with her magic, but then he just, waltzes up and he's like, no, I'll just pay for it, it's fine. And then he tells that story that leaves the whole ballroom enwrapped. He tells a story about Saren, who was in love with a female poet. She was the love of his life, and he got her this empty book for her to be able to write all of her poetry, all of her prose, and she dies. So he begins to fill it himself with eulogies to his lost love, and he writes one every day, and he transmits that into the underworld or across the veil. He doesn't really give specifics how he's transmitting it, but to his love who is in the afterlife. It's a very beautiful story. MC says, I had no idea that was the history of this, and he says it's not, I made it up. But I am not convinced that that is not a lost memory of Sylus's. Now, if you've played the 3rd myth, you know that Sylus has lost his memories too, which is not usually a Sylus thing. That's a total MC thing. The main story, as far as we can tell, Sylus has all of his memories and remembers everything. And I firmly believe that, and we can talk about that in another video. But so, he's lost his memories in the 3rd myth, which I also have theories for why. Again, I think that should probably be another video. I'm already clocking in at quite a long one. But The reason I say I wonder if it's a lost memory is Infold uses a lot of Greek mythology for Sylus's imagery and his backstory and his lore. There is a story in Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Now, if you don't know who that is, it's totally okay. A lot of people don't. If you've heard of a musical called Hadestown, then you do know who it is, because that is their story. It's modernized and set within New Orleans, and set to some of the best music you will ever hear. It's a phenomenal musical. But essentially the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, Orpheus is a bard. He's a musician, he's a poet. He falls in love with a nymph named Eurydice. She is bitten by a snake and dies. She's taken to the underworld, as everyone in Greek myth is when they pass on. Orpheus physically travels to the underworld, reaches Hades, makes a deal with Hades that he wants Eurydice back. He wants his wife back, the love of his life. Hades says, fine, you can have her. You have to lead her out of the underworld. You cannot look back at her. If you look back at her, she's sent immediately back to the underworld. She's stuck. She's stuck here forever. You can't look back at her until you get out of the underworld, until you emerge. Then, you could, be together, whatever. Orpheus is leading Eurydice out of the underworld. They're going, they're making it. And towards the end, he begins to not be able to hear her anymore. He begins to panic that she's lost him, that she's lost her way, that she's not going to be able to find him. And as his panic rises, he looks back. She's right there until she's not, because he looked back, and he damns her to the underworld forever. Now, the reason that I bring that myth up is because I could not get that out of my head with all of the dreams MC and Sylus were having in the third myth. The Rose Dream Plague. MC had a recurring dream about her and Sylus running. And she's ahead of him. He's behind her. She hears his voice, and he's saying, keep running, don't look back. Don't look back. And she panics. She whips around, sees him, and then she's yanked out of the dream and she's woken up. I could not get this out of my head. And so I wonder if we might get a little bit of a retelling of Orpheus and Eurydice. Might they inverse the roles of MC and Sylus? Sure. I'm going to make another video about Caleb, and I think they've inverted the roles of Caleb and MC with Adam and Eve. They like to do that a lot. They like to subvert stories, make them fresh, make them new, make them interesting. Not just to make them new and interesting, but I think also as a sort of feminist spin on some of these traditionally male perspective stories, which I think is really fun and cool. But so I am curious that we may get a combination of the story Sylus told of the mage who kind of became a poet in his own right, writing to his beloved with Orpheus and Eurydice, don't look back. I think we may get something in that realm. I am not as sure in terms of what Sylus's cosmic role will be. However, I do feel very confident that he is king of the underworld. Now, that's what we got in the third myth in terms of, the sovereign archfiend, right? But I suspect that each of the love interests and MC are all kind of embodiments of different cosmic entities. They're higher dimensional beings, and they are deeply enmeshed with the cosmos. And so I do think Sylus's is, let's go back to him being a fiend, right? And let's go back to the card I mentioned that's coming up in the 2nd year anniversary banner. I do think he's kind of a manifestation of primordial chaos. Kind of this essential counterbalance to order and fate and and the divine. I think he's kind of almost like yin and yang. I think he's kind of the polar opposite of that, but that is necessary to keep the universe in balance. Now, how that means he's going to manifest, I don't know. Are we going to see some sort of a fallen angel type story? Are we just going to see him as maybe a sort of poet, bard, mage who's lost his love? I don't know. I will continue theorizing every chance I get, every little bit of lore that I get. My lovely community calls me the lore whore, and I wear it with pride. But these are some of the things that have been on my mind about Sylus, about his myths. I adore him as a character. I think he is, I love him. And what's funny is, if you don't know me from my community, my second main, I say second main, I'm a harem girly, but my second favorite who he goes back and forth between being tied for first with Sylus and then kind of sliding into second is Raph, who I also think has a ton of parallels with Sylus. So many parallels. I have to do a whole video on Raph too. And maybe I'll do a whole video specific to the parallels between Sylus and Raph. Maybe. I might be able to be talked into it. I don't know. But realizing that, I was like, ooh, I do have a type. Ooh, yeah, I do. Yeah. I don't even know why I brought that up. I think I was just trying to say that I have a type, and that type is a certain trope and a certain subversion of that trope, and that I think Infold is doing. Oh, just to say that all these guys are so well written. They're so complex. They're so layered, so nuanced. I mean, Caleb, Xavier, and Zane are all just as equally well written. They're all just as magnificent of characters. I truly love them all. I do, and I love all of their lore. I'm trying to 100% everything in the game. Maybe it makes me a whale. Fine, but I want all of it. I love the writing. Infold, please hire me. No, you don't even need to hire me. I just want to sit in your writing room. I just want to observe. I just want to be a fly on the wall. And rub my hands together like an evil fly and just listen, because it would just be so fun and rewarding. Anyway, Sylus being a consent king is written into his DNA. As a dragon, he cannot consume a human soul without the consent of the human who possesses said soul. Also, as an archfiend, he cannot consume the blood of MC without her consent to do so. And I think part of the reason he makes deals all the time, we think of deals as being kind of a very demonic mechanism, a demonic tool. And it kind of also goes back to even the Judeo-Christian idea of possession, in terms of you can't be possessed unless you let them in. It's a reflection of the person's own sin. And for a religion that loves to make everyone terrified of hell, to do its bidding, yeah, that fits. But in terms of for Sylus, our consent king, I love how they've subverted that into a positive aspect of his character, into a green flag trait of a potential romance candidate, that consent is integral to who they are. And in the biblical sense, with demons, that's a bad thing, because if you consent to a demon, you are bad and you're full of sin. But in the case of Sylus, your consent is paramount to him, because he values your autonomy and treats you as an equal and respects you as a human. You're not just a thing. You're not an object. You're not something he owns. You're not someone he infantilizes. You're not someone he puts on a pedestal. You are his equal. And for me, that's what I've always wanted in a partner, and what I will always want in a partner more than anything. So that's why Sylus is my number one. Thank you so much for coming to my TED Talk.